Hello everyone, I'm here today to just give you a refresher around circle process. We've received some feedback around some concern about how to facilitate these circles, and I just want to remind you it's not about managing people, solving problems, or analyzing with your prefrontal cortex. This is a heart space. It's just about creating that safe space. That said, that's a little trickier than it sounds. You may recall a few years ago, I shared that the best teams at Google, they were trying to figure out what is the secret sauce of these teams. And they looked at every kind of identifier, class, and race, and it wasn't their cognitive power. It was that the highest performing groups that were the most innovative had created psychological safety. That's the secret sauce. How did they do that? Well, each member of the team felt that they could make mistakes. They could fail and recalibrate and try again. So there was something around those teams that allowed for that, which was the key to their success. So that is something that you want to kind of model and support in your groups. So let's go over a few of the elements. Just reminding you, you have this in the workbook, and there's lots of other resources that you can find about circle processes. I've been doing them myself for over a decade now in many different contexts. So I'm also happy to speak with you if you want to, during those phone call times I've set aside for you. If you have questions, we can talk privately. But let's get into this. So when you start a circle, you want to create a space. So the first thing you want to do, and it should be coming from your own style, is kind of set up the space. I like to set up the circle in a private room with natural lighting, and then create kind of an altar in the middle of the circle. This will be something that we will all contribute to as time goes by. So if it's a women's group, you could put some kind of matriarchal wise guide. If it's in a work context, something that inspires you, that, as we're doing the workbook, represents a quality you're trying to cultivate in yourself as you become that practitioner, or whatever role you have at the organization. It can really be anything, but people contribute to that center. Then you want to open the lid with great care. So creating this container, you want to establish the agreements among each other and the expectations. So these are kind of the social contracts you'll share. Respectful speech. One I often use is using I statements. So saying, I feel that blah, 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 blah. It's very easy to slip into, well, they say, or even other people. And we want to take responsibility for what we say in circle and bring into circle. So as a facilitator, you can just do this as a reminder when somebody is sort of slipping away from that. But you can create your ground rules. You can even tape them and put them on the wall so people can kind of keep reminding themselves. So the first thing is, okay, we've created these 4 or 5, bullet points for our circle. Respectful speech. There's some here in the values. Appreciation of differences. Focusing on interests and meaning. Taking personal accountability and sharing responsibility. Whatever is meaningful to you. And then you go around and you use your talking stick or talking object. And this is, you go around and say, I agree to these principles. And then you pass in a clockwise motion. You pass the talking object in a circle. This is important because we're practicing deep listening. When you have the stone, in this case a stone, I know it's my turn to speak. I'm taking responsibility for what I say. I'm making clear decisions of when I'm beginning and ending what I have to say. And then I'm passing it to another who I'm now going to listen to. It just makes it all more intentional. It's perfectly okay to pass the object and not talk, skip a turn. As a facilitator, if you bring the object and put it on the floor, it means, okay, we're taking a break. Let's crosstalk now. Any questions? Do we need a little bit more on that? Sometimes that happens, and you pick it up again. Now we're back in circle. We're going back in the circle. Each person has their turn. So this is important. It comes from Native American traditions. It's very old. It's all about listening. So that's something I would really encourage you to use. You might want to, on your first circle, you could put this in the altar. Everyone could choose a different talking object, and you could share, say why it's meaningful to you, and then share that story each time. So you establish your agreements, and then you decide to check in. Sometimes check-ins are a whole circle. That's it. You say, people haven't seen each other all month, so you say, okay, today I am wasted. This is what happened last night in the clinic, and you go on into your story, and then, but I'm happy to see everyone, and I feel energized just seeing your faces. I'm not alone, and then you turn. Oh, I feel good. Whatever people are saying, and then as a facilitator, you're getting your, you're taking pulse, getting the temperature of the room. So again, to remind you of facilitators, the biggest skill is you are bringing your sensory body instrument and your presence to this space. You are modeling it. People are feeling it. So if you're having a really off day, you might not want to facilitate circle. We're finding that based on also a lot of the feedback, not everyone is interested in facilitating. You're all capable of doing it for sure. But it's perfectly fine to identify a couple people who just seem really, this is intuitive for them. Intuitive meaning that they are able to recognize patterns in this way. They have high social emotional intelligence. They can create that psychologically safe container. And they're the people who do circle, and it's voluntary. It's offered, I still think it should be monthly, but it's offered whenever you can fit it in, and people go or not go. Just like the book, it's a resource. It's important to let go of expectations. The sand pane, right? You put a lot of care into it, and then you blow it out there. But it's important. It's all in the offering. The gift is in the offering. Okay, so you've checked in. Sometimes in the first circle, you introduce yourself. You basically say why you're doing this. In my case, I'll share my story, about how I lost my mom at 17, and then my sister ended up in a psych unit. I was her guardian. This was when I was 19, and this was the same time I was a crime reporter in Chicago, so on the night shift. So it was a pretty dark year between the mental institution, the asylum, and the crime scenes or the morgue. While my biorhythms were all messed up, so it did directly lead to my entering the seminary, where I began to learn all these practices. And heal myself and share this with other people. So you can share a little bit about what these practices have done in your life. And when I say practice, we've talked about how mindfulness can show up in a variety of ways. It can be a faith-based practice. It can be a kind of really strong physical practice. It can be writing poetry. It can be creative. But that you have something that you are intentional about. There's some discipline around it. It's meaningful to you. It's not random. And you've seen its positive effect in your life, and you are now sharing it. Other people will have their own practice, but embodying that as a facilitator is going to, relate non-verbally in a different way. You're going to have a different presence in the room. Okay, so You check in, you share your story, or maybe something about your object. You have your agreements. You've got, as a facilitator, you've got a sense of what's in the room that day. And then you start with an opening thought, perhaps connected to the workbook or a practice in the workbook. And, let's say it's something that we're all trying to cultivate, like deep listening. So you might take your object and say, being heard is so similar to being loved. So remember a time that you felt heard or seen or validated by another person. How did you know that? How did you know that you were loved or validated? Did your body rest in that knowing? Was your breath more spacious? Did your nervous system drop down? Was there a felt sense of letting go and freedom? How did you feel unconditional love? How did you feel validated or heard? So this could be the opening question, and then you share a story about what it felt like to be really heard. I'm thinking right now of, when I was a teenager and my own mother came up to me as, sort of an awkward, probably 13-year-old who had a crush on her first boy, and he really didn't seem to see me, and I felt really, shattered by this. And my mom looked me right in the eye and said, one day the person who loves you is going to love you because of the way you smile and the way your eyes shine and the way, all those things that a mother says. But it felt real because she did know me. And when you hear truth, you know it. It's not going to be, love is going to be because of those particular flaws that you have, the particular beauties that you have that make you you. So that's my memory. It could be, anything. And then you share that. You go around the circle. Everyone listens to each other. And that's a real gift. It's rare to be really heard and seen in that way. So now you're inside the container. This is the juicy stuff, the embodied practices. You keep checking in and validating people. If someone, for example, keeps passing the stone, you might decide that's totally valid, but you might decide on your next turn to say, as a facilitator, I just want to acknowledge and my appreciation for so-and-so for taking care of themselves by being quiet today, but still being with us and pass. You're kind of noticing what's happening, and you just want to keep creating that safe container. Staying present. Remember, this is an opportunity for being, not doing, or planning, or being even hypervigilant. Giving choices. You might do a physical practice. It could be any of the practices in the workbook, or it could be like a discharge practice, can be very popular with people who are overwhelmed. So some sort of tapping or vocal toning or shaking. I just want to throw that out there. That's something that I find. Or you could practice bringing regulation and harmony through some breathing exercises, or a guided meditation, or holding steadiness with while being with the unbearable. Feeling like you can. The Tonglen practice I've shared in the past, where you're actually breathing in some of the darkness. This is Pema Chodron's practice, if you need the reference. And then you do closure. You just like the opening, that thought about being heard. You can also include a poem or a little quote or a story. I like to end in a similar way. I'm just sharing this quote. And this is helpful if there's been maybe a lot of strife or interpersonal tension, maybe between community persons and practitioners, or even among colleagues, or the Ministry of the State, whatever, it doesn't matter. Saying, just like me, this person is seeking happiness in their life. May my heart turn toward this knowing. Just like me, this person is trying to avoid suffering in the world. May my heart turn toward this deep knowing. Just like me, this person has known sadness, loneliness, and despair. May my heart turn toward this deep knowing. Just like me, this person is seeking to fill their needs. Their needs may be different than mine, but may my heart turn toward this knowing, this listening. Just like me, this person is learning about life. So may my heart turn toward this deep listening, this deep knowing, and may my heart quiver with compassion. And for many of us, turning our hearts toward in this way, this empathy, this compassionate practice that we're trying to deepen within ourselves, it may be complicated or difficult. So this may also be helpful. May I be mindful and loving to whatever arises. But if I cannot be loving in this moment, may I be kind. If I cannot be kind, may I be non-judgmental. And if I cannot be non-judgmental, may I not cause any harm. And if I cannot not cause harm, may I cause the least amount of harm possible. So this reminder that we're gonna fail. Again, the most successful teams were ones who they acknowledged that they failed, but they were supported by each other. They recalibrated, and then they tried again. They had this right, this idea of not causing harm. May I do no harm. So just in closing, there's this idea of post-traumatic growth, which is gaining traction. So as you know, there's different kinds of stress and trauma. There's trauma that can be complex, vicarious, not just connected to one event or an episode, but it results in symptoms such as hypervigilance, coercion, neglect, abandonment. And there's actually a theory that because humanitarian and global health work, the mission of it is witnessing suffering to some extent, confronting la enormidad, that the danger is that without a space to reflect upon and feel and process one's experience, you may actually reproduce some of these structural violences or power dynamics within organizations. Now, Sess has been creating these spaces since I've been working with you. But it's just, again, something to think about. Stephen Porges, Porges, he's the creator of polyvagal theory. And he talks about how we're all kind of traumatized as humans to some degree, overwhelmed. And it's important to acknowledge that when we are overwhelmed, we do not and cannot support ourselves and each other. And that support, again, is the critical piece of what makes this work sustainable. People have spoken to us about working in Afghanistan as if it's Shangri-La, and it's because even though it was a conflict zone, a compound living, people internationally and domestic volunteers were so united in their mission, and this culture of hospitality was so strong, mutual respect and support and friendship. Without creating spaces to process and reflect upon and feel our relationship with this work, we may cause harm through unintended consequences towards people, towards patients, or even to each other through microaggressions, in the work environment. In either case, the treatment is the creation of safe relationships where the aim is that no one gets hurt, coerced, or abandoned. And when they do, because we will fail again, we will fail, we use these restorative principles to repair the harm and address the unmet needs. We show up in circle. And even if we're not speaking that day, we're listening, we're there, we're present. And as Parker Palmer says in his book, The Power to Change, relational trust is built on human heart elements such as empathy, compassion, patience, and the capacity to forgive. So taking our seat as a facilitator means we're grounded, we're resourced, not pulling from an empty well. We're hydrated, well-rested, responsive, and not reactive. That we continue to nourish ourselves from our own practice. And we show up fully and completely. We're ready to create this container for others. So with that, a big beso y abrazo para all of you. Para todo. And again, I hope you can reach out to me if any other further questions. And I look forward to hearing how this continues to evolve for all of you and the important work that you do. Take good care of yourselves. Cuídate. Adios.